Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra where I give you some juicy nuggets, things to talk about, things to think about. And we're going to start with some philosophy because, hey, I love philosophy. And this is a prime subject to talk about because I see this a lot. And I was watching a prominent YouTuber who does the same kind of analysis I do. She has a huge following, much more prominent than I am. And he made a comment last night on the stream he was doing, and I watched that, and I was like, I've got a real problem with that." Where he said, "I'm neutral, and here are all the reasons I'm neutral." He says, "At the end of the day, this isn't my problem. This war is not my problem. So therefore, they can do what they do, and I'm just going to make neutral commentary on it." I was like, "No, I have real problems with this." So if I was walking down the street and looked across the street and saw an old granny getting beaten up by a kid, right, fractured jaw, steals a purse, leaves her for dead, me watching that and going, I could stand there and go, "Well, that's not my problem," and I could just comment while he's doing that and say, "Oh, he's fractured a jaw there. Oh, stolen a purse. Oh, left her for dead. There you go. Well, that's life. That's what happens when you walk down these streets." That to me is egregious, right? In that situation, I want to get involved. It's slightly more difficult in this situation for me to go to Ukraine and get involved. But the idea that I would just look at that and refuse to evaluate it morally because it's not my problem is a problem, right? I fundamentally disagree with that. So to sit there and watch Hitler, let's go to Godwin's law, let's go to the worst example. Let's sit there and watch Hitler kill 6 million Jews, right? And go, I'm not a Jew. It's not my problem. Okay. So the first problem is that is, I think, morally egregious to do that. I think irrespective of whether it's your problem, it's affecting you. The problem is yours. You are still able to and should, if you were morally upstanding, be able to cast your moral evaluation over that in such a way that you can say, "I disagree with that. And here are the reasons I disagree with that. And this is why you should disagree with that as well." Because otherwise, standing by passively and not casting your opinion is, in a sense, you know, promoting that to happen. That kind of lack of opinion is consent. It's like, it's passive consent for that. Okay. But then the second problem is, um, the second issue, I should stop saying the word problem. Second issue is to say, in saying it's not my problem, you are saying that actually you are not part of the global community. You are somehow living in a bubble where these things don't affect me, but they do affect you because you are part of the human species and you're part of this globe and you're part of this world. And although you might live in a different country, these are other human beings in the same way that I'm on a different side of the road, but there's still a human being across the road that's getting beaten up. And these things do affect you. They affect all of us in terms of cost of living, in terms of fuel and energy, in terms of geopolitics and what's going to go on in the future. Who's going to take advantage of the scenario where the West aren't reacting strongly enough, or who's going to be afraid because the West are acting in unison and strongly. Depending on what goes on here, that will define our future as well as our present economically and morally. So the idea that it's not my problem is a broken concept, and I think anyone who advocates that and says that they are neutral in a situation like this is themselves morally negligent at best. So that's my position on that, and I feel quite strongly about that. I try and report my stuff objectively, and by that I'm not saying, I don't support either side. I'm just looking at maps and saying, no, I support Ukraine, because they are morally in the right here. But I'm trying to get the facts as neutrally as possible, so I'm not being biased by facts that confirm to my desire that Ukraine win, right? Or not facts, claims that conform to my desire that Ukraine win. So I want to try and be as neutral in the reportage of what's going on, whilst retaining the belief that Ukraine have been wronged by the imperialistic Russians and all the other things that are going on with Putin and Russia. So yeah, I think it's difficult, and I don't think people should say, "Hey, I'm completely neutral. I don't support either side," because I think in order to say that, you are being morally blind. Anyway, if you want. Please put your comments below, but do so respectfully. Okay, so I reported yesterday that Igor Girkin had joined a volunteer unit. So he was a big name. He was one of the main sort of generals behind the separatist armies in the 2014 annexation of the Donbass, or parts of the Donbass. And he's since been a big Telegram voice and a military blogger of the nationalist sort in Russia, really aggressively arguing that Russia should be doing more and worse and all this kind of stuff. And then he supposedly joined a volunteer unit, and this was supposed to be one of the images of him in Ukraine. And everyone's like, "Oh, he's in Ukraine." And this is why I love skepticism, right? And I love fact checking. And I reported, "Look, this is him in Ukraine." And then people were like, not to me, but people on Twitter were like, "No, he's not in Ukraine, because this is that signpost, this is this bit of railing, that's that bit of yellow, and this is this bit of curb." Right? It's just absolutely brilliant. I love this. It's like, and I've geolocated it to this position, and in fact, here it is. There, it's not in Ukraine. He is in Rostov, in Russia. Okay. Well, brilliant. Excellent. I mean, the fact is, he's still doing that stuff. I don't know whether he will end up going to Ukraine, whether it's just a big sort of PR stunt. But I love it. Love that. Okay. Russian live TV. This is very interesting, and it will bring us onto our sort of drone conversation. So on Russian live TV, they decided to ask the expert at Russian MOD about the economy, but he didn't know his mic was on. So this is a hot mic incident. So he told them, "Don't rock the boat with your questions about Iranian drones. Everybody is aware that they are Iranian, but our government is denying it." Absolutely brilliant. So this is in Russian.
Как, в принципе, изменится мировой рынок, спросим у эксперта в нашей студии Руслан Пухов, директор Министерства обороны России.
So it cuts the music. Music goes over. He thinks he's not being listened to. He's not on the mic. And he just speaks very quietly to them.
Раскачивать не будем, поэтому я очень прошу вас сильно на этих иранских, потому что это классика истории. Жопа есть, а слова нет, да? Мы все знаем, что они иранские, но власти не признали.
Руслан Николаевич.
So I don't know what she says, but it'd be something like, "Shut up, you're on air." So don't, but this is deadly serious, actually. Russia are doing the classic denial, plausible deniability, but it's not plausible, and it's not deniable. So, and here's a Russian MOD expert saying, "Everyone knows they're Iranian, we're just denying it." And he's caught saying that on TV. So, brilliant. Talking about drones, so these drones are a problem. In fact, here's an example of another Iranian drone. So this one is the Mirage 521, and it looks a bit like the Raytheon Coyote UAS. So, which is that one. So this is just the fact that it seems that Iran are providing an even greater variety of weapons that are both cheap, somewhat effective, and a real thorn in the side of the Ukrainians. So the issue here is that the Ukrainians are really suffering, and these drones are getting through, even if 80 to 86% of them are getting shot down. They are cheap enough that you can send more. It's kind of like theory of having lots of offspring in evolution. You have lots of offspring. So if you're an animal that has like 30 offspring, you have 30 offspring because 26 of them are going to die. So if the four survive, job done, right? So in this case, it's let's have 2,500 going across in hope that 100 of them get through, and they will cause the damage we need. And those 100 will cause more than the 2,500 cost us. Right, that damage. There's an asymmetry going on there, but it's not the cost of the damage that's just the problem for the Ukrainians. In this case, 30 to 40% of the electricity output and distribution, and that will increase, which causes knock-on effects to the economy. So in the end, that costs potentially billions. But it's the cost of sending up these missiles, which are often Western missiles that cost an arm and a leg, and they are in shorter supply. So here we've got fragments of the IRIS-T missile system and missile from the IRIS-T missile system, that the Germans are just given over. That's being used in and around Kyiv. We know because they found a piece of missile around Kyiv. So it's done its job. It's hit. Let's say it's hit a Iranian drone that the Russians are using. Job done. Okay, but at what cost for both the Ukraine? Well, not for the West. Depends whether the West are giving these or selling these. But at what cost for the defense? Here is Trent Telenko giving, and this is a very long thread. I'll try and rush through it, but this is fascinating. And some of you might disagree with this. You might say this is terrorism. He's saying it's not terrorism. What the Iranian drones are doing is not terrorism. So he says this is the single most important piece of data in this thread. The Russian objective in the attacks on Kyiv isn't terror. It's just a side benefit. So the Russian Air Force objective is suppression of air defenses, so SEAD, we've talked about that before, by running the Ukrainians out of surface-to-air missiles. So the Shahed 136 are being fired at targets Ukraine has to defend and which forces the Ukrainian Integrated Air Defences IADs to engage. Power stations and power grid components in dense urban areas are on the top of the must-defend list. Ukraine has one of the densest IADs in the world outside of Moscow Oblast. Nobody has the necessary density of anti-aircraft defenses for a $20,000 loitering munition with a 40-kilogram warhead against all the vulnerable fixed targets they can engage within a 1,200-kilometer range. What he's saying there is these got such a range, they're so cheap, but they're potent enough that they can cause damage to anything within Ukraine, effectively. And therefore, the Ukrainians are unable to defend against everything. That can be pylons, it can be an electricity substation in the middle of nowhere, it can be this, it can be that. You can't have missiles, defensive missiles, set up around all of these things. So there are so many things like step-down transformers, grid interconnects, and long-haul electric lines and major power plants a little GPS-guided drone can't take out that they can take out that are completely unguarded. The loss of 30% of the Ukraine's power grid generation reflects this fact. Some on Twitter are calling Russia attacking the Ukrainian power grid as a part of the SEAD campaign terrorism. World War II called it strategic bombing. World War II was correct about that. So here's two images again of the sort of V1 bombers that went over London, for example, and the drones going over Ukraine. And there's a parallel there, 80 years apart. This guy's saying both were weapons aimed at terrorizing, vengeance weapons aimed at terrorizing civilians. Trent Telenko says, no, these ones aren't. The Russians have purchased over 2,000 Shahed 136 at $20,000 each. Cheap, small, low, slow, and GPS accurate is the way to beat modern IADs because their missiles are too darn expensive and they lack enough guns. Consider this, 37 of the 43 Shahed 136 drones shot down is 86%. This is with a Ukrainian shortage of fighters, SAMs, and anti-aircraft installations. The 43 Shaheeds cost Russia $860,000 to fire. They ran Ukraine out at least 5 times and maybe as many as 100 times that $860,000 cost figure in terms of defending air-to-air and surface-to-air missiles to get those 37 kills just on the missiles alone. So don't think about any other cost. Just think about the missiles taking out those 37 drones. Assuming they're not like taken out by small arms fire. A couple of them might have been, but let's assume missiles here for the sake of argument. So a new Stinger Manpad, so those are shoulder launch one, class missile from Raytheon using stockpiled out-of-date components is $120,000. Okay, so that's less than an eighth of the cost of all of the drones, one missile. We don't have cost numbers for Ukrainian missiles for its fighters or its Igla, Osa, Buk, and S-300 SAMs, but we do have these cost numbers. An AIM-9X, 472,000. An AIM-120, 1.095 million. Hellfire, 213,000. Patriot Pack 3, 3 million. They're not using Patriots, the Ukrainians, but it gives you an idea. Let's convert the previous missile cost numbers into how many Shahed 136 they could buy. So for one missile, Stinger could buy 6 drones. AIM-9X could 23.6, AIM-120 55 drones, so on and so forth. A single Patriot missile could buy 150 of those drones. And yet one missile can only take out one of those drones. That's the asymmetry that's going on here. Previous cost trade-off is why Russian Shahed 136 attacks on Ukraine are seed and not terrorist strikes. Russia can trade the cost of US Stingers for Iranian Shahed and win economically. And Russian Orlan 10 drones being downed by Buk missiles are achieving the same. So I talked about this before. I said how that even though there is an asymmetry, if that reconnaissance drone is taking out a whole battery of artillery, then your expensive missile needs to be costed against that expensive stuff. And you could say the same for here. The cost of these missiles are saving the electricity transformers. But in just simple real terms, Russia is spending a fraction of what Ukraine and its allies are spending. The seed numbers are even worse when you look at the manned PSU jet fighters. The AFU lost a MiG-29 to a Shahed 136 when it closed to gun range for its 5th kill and 8 debris from the last Shahed 136. So that I talked to you about that the other day, about how a fighter went down, taking out one of these drones. The result was a smoking hole in the ground where a $30 million MiG-29 and $5 million in missiles wound up. The cost of replacing that MiG-29, its weapons, was equal to the cost of 1,750 Shahed 136s. This is the World War II V1 interception problem. So please note that the issue is that Cold War manned aircraft are 1,000 times more costly than World War II fighters, and lawnmower engine prop drones, they are 100 times cheaper than a Nazi V1 in today's dollars. Cheap, small, low, and slow is a way to beat modern air defenses. These munitions are so cheap compared to anti-aircraft missiles, they have priced them out of the war. This is a cost-based rate of attrition. A seed attacker will always win. And this problem is only going to get worse. First, Shahed 136 are not top-end loitering munitions. Next, they had the Russian potato-level intelligence surveillance recce backing them up with Iranian IRGC instructors doing the targeting, and they were fired into the densest IADs Ukraine had in Kyiv. This threat will get orders of magnitude worse with compound helicopter loitering munitions using digital maps and nulling GPS antennas for navigation updates. One of the seed guys on my email list said it was low signature and low altitude that made Shahed their ilk. So dangerous. I disagreed. It is less low signature than the best stealth is having a terrain feature between you and an enemy radar. It weighs nothing, costs nothing, and works for every frequency other than OTHB radars, for which they are too small to pick up. To get that top-end terrain stealth, you have to fly at 100 to 180 kts knots indicated airspeed with satellite radio navigation updates. Shaheds do that, and their problem will get worse as time goes on, as cheaper IT lets digital maps with IADS information get programmed. What he's saying here is as soon as they start working on these drones, upgrading them a little bit, getting them to do a little bit more stealth or go lower so the radar can't pick them up, and they're using programmed mapping, these things are going to be a real problem. And these things are turning into compound helicopters, so they can fly below tree lines when they get close to the target. The nature of what constitutes air power has radically changed. IADS needs to match this change by looking to its World War II past. What 21st century air defenses need are the World War II level of gun-based Dakar, similar to Antwerp versus a V1 buzz bomb, to deal with Shahed. You need dirt cheap weapons like guns because only bullets and shells are cheap enough to win at the price you can afford. This is really interesting. So it's like in order to deal with these low tech threats that are high cost, low tech threats, you need low cost, low tech defenses. So sorry, these low cost, low tech threats, you need low cost, low tech defenses. And so on and so forth. I mean, you can go read the rest of that, where he advises what to do about that. But I'm going to move on to the next idea. He just concludes: deep belts of first-ground observers with radar-guided searchlights, then heavy guns with radar proximity fuses, autocannons with their own observers, and these were placed. And this is what they need to do. So on and so forth. So I thought that was really interesting, and because people are, remember, calling for Israel to bring in their Iron Dome, and I think they are getting some support in terms of advice. And although Israel may not be supplying Ukraine with rockets and drones themselves, with weapons, they may supply them with rocket and drone alert systems. So the actual defensive systems, but not weapons. So a bit like the West in the very beginning, NATO in the very beginning were big on only providing Ukraine defensive weapons, and that's kind of morphed a little bit now. So Israel might be stepping up some help for Ukraine. But I was called out yesterday for saying that 1 in 9 Israelis speak Russian, and therefore they are going to largely have, even though a third of those are of Ukrainian descent. There's going to be a substantial pro-Russian contingent in Israel. That means that the Israelis are reticent to show their full-blown support for Ukraine. And I was called out to say, how do you know this is true? How do you know what these people actually believe? And these people have often come away from Russia precisely because they disagree with Putin and that kind of regime. And that's absolutely right. And it's really difficult to find opinion, good, robust data for opinion of Russians and Russian speakers in Israel and who they support. This one is now behind a paywall. I was reading this yesterday and I wanted to show you a bit, and now it's behind a paywall, so that's annoying. But you had a claim that even though there's 15% of the population are Russian, a guy that was interviewed in here said, well, 90% of them are kind of pro-Ukraine. But that number appeared to be completely arbitrarily picked out of the air. So my conclusion is, yeah, good point. I don't know. I really do, and it's all right to say I don't know, rather than put all my eggs in some rickety basket. It will be interesting to know what the Russian population or Russian-speaking population in Israel really think about the Ukraine war, and of course, there's going to be a whole variety. Germany has fired their cybersecurity chief over Russia ties, and this is really embarrassing for the Germans. Germans have got a lot of stick, right, for not supporting Ukraine enough, until you realise actually they have given the third most amount of military aid to Ukraine. So actually they are doing quite a lot, but there's really problematic messaging going on in there because they have tried to get Russia on side in the past, and they use a lot of Russian energy, and lots of people have ties with people in Russia, like this cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is such a big thing for Russia, and for their attempts that the guy that's in charge of cybersecurity in Germany having such close ties to Russia is just bad news all round. He's said to have maintained close ties to the association and attended their 10th anniversary celebrations in September. So this is a Russian company, a previous role that he had with them, I believe, and so on and so forth. I mean, you can go and find the details, it's all over the internet. But that's not good news. Okay, to move sideways, The Sun reported. Now, The Sun is a UK tabloid newspaper. Take anything they say with a huge pinch of salt. But this coincided with the Ben Wallace, who is a UK defence secretary, suddenly rushing into Westminster, I think, or maybe is rushing over to speak to Americans. I'm not quite sure. Sorry, but rushing around somewhere and everything being all a bit like, oh, what's going on? And there's this idea that the Sun postulate that Putin is feared to be plotting to detonate a nuclear weapon in the Black Sea. And this is how he could use a nuke without having the full devastating impact of the nuke and destroying sort of lives and ground, but instead, poisoning the water. But it's kind of like the next stage of muscle flexing, of saber rattling, saying, I can use them and I will use them. I'm just going to use them here. Next time I'm going to use them on the land. So this is a real worry, and they've said that. But actually, it turns out that maybe why Ben Wallace was rushing around into a meeting was that Russian fighter jets, 2 of them, Su-27s, followed a rivet joint, which is an RAF sort of radar spy plane, if you like, patrolling over the Black Sea, doing its normal stuff. 2 Russian jets followed it. I think it lasted for 90 minutes, and they fired a missile. They fired a missile near this plane. And so this is all really controversial. And Ben Wallace has reported on that in Parliament. And this is, the UK have shown their disdain to Shoigu and the Russian military. Not that would do anything at all. But there you go. Things are interesting, hotting up. Politically, in the UK, things are an absolute shite show. I mean, goodness me, we've had a prime minister for 6 weeks, and it looks like she's going to be ousted. I don't want to get into the politics of that, but why it's pertinent to Ukraine is, will our support of Ukraine maintain? Ben Wallace is the defense secretary, and actually he's been a fairly safe pair of hands. And he was the defense secretary or minister for defense for Boris Johnson before defense secretary. I'm getting my words muddled up. For Boris Johnson before Liz Truss came in, and then he was one of the few ministers who continued in their role, sort of cabinet ministers that continued in their role through into the Truss administration, to the Truss government. So he's been fairly consistent, or he's been very consistent both in himself and the fact that he's remained in post. And if Truss goes, I would put my mortgage on him remaining in that position still, because there's no point in moving him out of that position. He's doing a good job and he's got expertise in that area. And the final thing to talk about is this piece of hilarity, which is a Russian-funded Georgia TV station where they are claiming that the brigade trained in the UK and equipped by the UK was completely taken out, lured by the Russians, and into the firebag and destroyed. And here they talk about it. Here's a former general, and they're talking about this. And they talk about this, discuss this, and then they show the video. Show the video of this, except that's a video from a computer game. So it's just like, seriously, guys, is this seriously what it comes down to? You're going to show some computer game footage as evidence that a UK trained Ukrainian brigade has been completely destroyed. Anyway, there you go. Round the houses today. But I'll be interested to see what you think about It's Not My Problem. I think as members of society and the global community, things like this very much are our problem. And if we don't show that they are our problem, then that is passive consent to allow it to continue. Anyway, as ever, thank you so much for your support. If you have anything to say, put it in the comments below. If you can like, subscribe, and share this, please do. If you'd like to contribute and to help this channel, you can do YouTube thanks, buy me a coffee down below, or even join the channel, or even PayPal or whatever. But just thanks so much. And as I say on my philosophy videos, and I think it's pertinent to this as well, when we're looking at different sources, I always say at the end of my philosophy videos, question everything, particularly yourselves. And the great physicist Richard Feynman said, I'm paraphrasing here, he says something like, you want to be careful, the easiest person to fool is yourself. So, be aware that you are the easiest person to fool. And we have something called motivated reasoning that motivates us towards reasoning in a certain way, not because it's the best reasoning, the best rationale, but we are motivated towards the conclusions that rationale will bring us to. So it's motivated towards something. So you're believing it because of the conclusion, and you're kind of working your way backwards, where really you want to build up towards a conclusion. So think about those things when, I don't know, you're messing around the internet and people are telling you stuff. Anyway, see you tomorrow. Bye.